This is the second part, our screencasts, looking into how to create a book using InDesign. In this part, we'll actually discuss what to do to prepare your book file for ePub export. So to get started, let's go ahead and open up our Grimm's Fairy Tale book. And if you remember from the last screencast, we had 4 documents that we included, 2 chapters, a table of contents, and a cover. Chapter 1 is actually set as our style source, which means that Chapter 1 includes all of our paragraph styles, character styles, master pages, text variables. And we're using Chapter 1 to synchronize across all of the documents within our book. So to begin, a couple of things about the ePub format. When you export out to ePub, an ePub is actually a web page. So what you're asking InDesign to do is to convert your InDesign documents to HTML. And there are several considerations you need to be aware of when you're making that conversion. The first one is you need to prepare all of your styles to export to HTML. To do this, go ahead and open up Chapter 1. And what we want to do is edit each of our paragraph styles. We'll begin by editing the chapter title. When you export out to ePub, all of your styles, your paragraph styles, will be converted to CSS. Now CSS in the world of web are presentation instructions, how an element should actually look. If we take a look at our style settings that we've set up here in InDesign, we notice that the chapter title paragraph style is set to Adobe Castellan Pro, bold style, 18-point font, center alignment, all caps with a space after it equal to 1 pica, 2 points. In order for this to be properly exported out to CSS, we need to set up something called export tagging. In the left-hand column at the very bottom, choose the export tagging section. In this particular series of options, we can choose exactly which text element we want this particular style to use when it exports out to HTML. To see the various options, click on this drop-down. You'll notice some various symbols. Now, if you're not familiar with HTML, P means paragraph, H1 means a first level heading. This would be reserved for things, say, a title of an article or the name of a specific web page. It's the most important text on the page. A second level heading, this would be something like, say, a subheading within an article. Third level, fourth level, fifth level, and sixth level heading. As the levels increase in HTML, what you're really doing is you're saying that they actually decrease in priority. It's a little counterintuitive, but this is probably a good time for you to brush up on your HTML if you don't know it already. Now in our case, our chapter title is the most important piece of text in the chapter, so therefore we're going to say that each one of the chapter titles is a first level heading. Next, InDesign wants to know what the class name is going to be when it creates the CSS. Now a class name is just a unique name that is going to be applied to these particular elements. It's a way for the ePub reader to identify which elements should be styled in a very specific way. Now InDesign manages all this using the paragraph styles that you apply. When we convert it to ePub, though, we need to make sure that the class name is something that the ePub readers are familiar with. Class names in HTML should never use spaces. In fact, if you look down here in the export details, the class name that it's currently using is a duplicate of the paragraph style name. Notice the space. Now this is not necessarily required, but as a rule of thumb, I always rename all of my paragraph styles when I'm exporting out to ePub. I use the class name. I basically convert my style name that I've used previously to lowercase, and I replace any spaces with hyphens or dashes. So in this case, chapter space title becomes chapter dash title. And you'll notice now the class name is changed as well. Furthermore, down here in the details, you'll see that this particular paragraph will be tagged as a first level heading with the class name, chapter title. The font weight will be bold, the font style will be normal, the font size will be 18 pixels, the text decoration will be set to none, and if we continue on down, you'll notice, we keep going, there we go, the margin on the bottom is 14 pixels. Now, this is the equivalent to space after. Notice it doesn't actually represent 1 pica, 2 points. When you're converting something to ePub, HTML and CSS, you're not going to utilize points and picas. You're actually going to utilize pixels. Now, when it exports it out, 1 pixel will be equal to 1 point. So 1 pica, 2 points, or if we were to convert that to actual points, that would be 14 points. In this case, it gets converted to 14 pixels. Once again, 1 point equals 1 pixel. The last thing we want to do is we want to check to split the document. Now, what this will do is anytime InDesign comes across this particular paragraph style, it will ensure that that text and any of the text that follows it is placed in a brand new HTML document. Furthermore, the chapter title will begin a brand new page. Now, because an ePub is essentially a web document, if you do not check this box, what may end up happening is one of the chapters later on in the book may actually end up starting in the middle or at the bottom of a page. So by choosing to split the document, you are ensuring that the chapters will begin on their own new page because they will be their own individualized HTML document. With the chapter title style done, we'll click OK. And now we'll do the same to body paragraph. Now in this case, these particular styles are applied to all of our paragraphs within our document. So if the tag we want to use is actually the paragraph tag, I'm going to rename the class name using lowercase and dashes, and I'm going to make sure that split document is turned off. We don't want each paragraph to be its own individual HTML document. We don't want every paragraph to begin a brand new page. So we'll definitely leave that off. With that done, now we just need to resynchronize all of our styles across our book. So we'll go ahead and select all the documents here in the book panel. And from our menu, we'll synchronize book. The second step is we need to actually fix the cover file. So if we take a look at the cover file basically exists or consists of just a single text frame. Inside of that text frame, we have some text that's been styled specifically. It's been vertically justified in the center and horizontally centered as well, horizontally aligned. So here's the problem. When this gets exported out to an ePub, InDesign is going to look at this as just a paragraph of text. And so what's going to happen is the first page in our ePub is just going to have Grimm's fairy tale up at the top, and then immediately following that is going to be the table of contents. In other words, from a visual perspective, you're not going to see the first page be representative of what you've laid out here in InDesign, because once again, in HTML, all that white space is just ignored. So we need to correct this. Now, there's a couple different ways that we can correct this particular problem. You can, of course, create a brand new style just for your cover page and set up export tagging and make sure that this particular style is on its own page by splitting the document. But what I'm going to show you now is the export options. And if we go and grab our selection tool and we select our text frame, right click or control click on it, if we go down to Object Export Options. Now the object export options generally are used for things like images or videos that you're going to insert into your ePub. Click on the ePub and HTML tab. You'll notice that we've got a couple of options that we can play with. Under Preserve Appearance from Layout, choose to rasterize the container. Now what this will tell InDesign to do is that on export to ePub, it's going to take this text frame and it's going to create an image from it. So the way that the text is currently laid out, the positioning, that's going to be converted to an image. In this case, we're telling it to convert to a JPEG. It's going to be 300 ppi at high quality. Choose the custom layout option, and we want to make sure that this is centered on the page and that we want to insert a page break after the image. Now this will ensure, depending on whichever ePub reader that you're currently using, if the JPEG that's generated is a little too short for the page size, we don't want the table of contents to suddenly kind of creep in at the bottom of this image that it's going to create. So we want to ensure that the only thing on this page when we export it out is going to be this image. And we do that by inserting a page break following the image. That's the only thing we need to fix on the cover file. Next, we need to discuss our table of contents. Now when you export out to an ePub actually creates its own table of contents. It's an internal table of contents. Generally on an ePub reader there's a button that you would press and that would actually open up an internal table of contents. Now in order for us to be able to use the table of contents that we have created, in other words the entries, to build that internal table of contents, the first thing we need to do is we need to actually make sure that we have created a table of contents style. Now if you remember in the last screencast, if we go to layout in table of contents style, there's not one that is actually created. We were actually using the default table of contents in InDesign. So we're going to need to actually fix that. So to get started, in the table of contents styles, we want to actually choose new. And what we're going to do is we're going to recreate the table of contents that we did previously. The first step is we need to give the style a name. So I'll call this Grim Table of Contents. And as we did before, we need to come in and actually reproduce all of the options for our table of contents. So table of contents will be the name. The style we want is that table of contents title. The entry is going to be made up using the chapter title paragraph style. We want to style this particular entry using the table of contents entry paragraph style that we created. We want the page number after the entry. We're going to style the page number using the table of contents page number character style that we created previously. And between the entry and the number, we don't want a regular tab. Instead, we want a right indent tab. Now, when we previously created a table of contents, that's all that we did. However, there's one more step we need to make sure that we do in order for these table of contents to be clickable or tappable, as the case may be. In other words, if somebody were to tap on the Golden Bird or Hans in Luck, the way that we have the table of contents set up right now, nothing will happen. The user will not actually be taken to those particular chapters. In order for the HTML or the ePub to generate links to those specific chapters, we need to make sure that we check this option down here at the bottom, which is Make Text Anchor in Source Paragraph. Now that's a mouthful, but essentially what that means is convert the entries into clickable links. Why they didn't say that, I don't know. But you want to make sure you choose to make the text anchor in the source paragraph. When that's done, we'll go and click OK. Now we have our Grim Table of Contents style created. Next thing we need to do is replace the table of contents that we did previously with the one that we just created. So go back up to Layout, choose Table of Contents, make sure the Grim Table of Contents is selected from the drop-down. All the settings will automatically be set up for you. Click OK. Let InDesign generate your table of contents, and add it. Now, it seems like a lot of work for something that we already had, but it's important to note that when you create your table of contents using a predefined style, two things open up for you in the ePub export. Number one, when we include these table of contents in the actual book itself, the actual layout, these links will be clickable and will allow the user to navigate directly to the chapter that they want without having to use the internal table of contents. The second thing is that the internal table of contents for the ePub will actually use our entries instead of the file names for each one of our documents, which can be rather ugly. So it's very important that you make these changes to your table of contents before you export out to the ePub. Now, in order for us to be able to use the table of contents style in our ePub export, the trick is that the table of contents document now has to be our style source. So if you remember previously, chapter 1 was our style source, which is denoted by this icon. To change that, simply click on this box, and that will move the icon across from table of contents. That's all you need to do. But that's an important step. If you forget to do this, when you export out to ePub, you're not going to be able to choose the style we just created for our table of contents. With that done, we are now ready to export to ePub. So select all of the documents in your book, and from the menu, you want to choose Export Book to ePub. Choose a specific file name and where you want to save it to. And from the format, you have two options. Now, I'm using InDesign CC 2014. So the two options I have available are fixed layout and reflowable. If you use a previous version of InDesign, you're only going to be able to export out to a reflowable option. For this demonstration, I am going to use the reflowable ePub. So choose that and click Save. And this will open up the ePub options. First thing is the version. By default, the ePub version will be 2.0.1. You can also choose to actually export out to an ePub 3.0, which has more features. However, as of this particular screencast, the support for ePub 3.0 version is still in its infancy. So in order to make sure that your ePub is widely available to the most devices, I would go ahead and choose 2.01. Furthermore, there was nothing in our ePub that would require us to even think about using the 3.0 format. Next, the cover. Now the cover is the little graphic when you open up your ePub reader. It's a little graphic that represents your book. A lot of ePub readers create a kind of a skeuomorphism where it looks like it's a bookshelf and the cover images are placed like books on a bookshelf, much like if you were to walk into like a brick and mortar store like a Barnes & Noble. In this particular case, it's asking us whether or not we want to rasterize the first page. In other words, take our cover file and actually take a snapshot of that and use that as our cover page. Or we can actually choose an image. Now, I haven't prepared an image for this one, so I'm going to go ahead and tell it to rasterize the first page. Next, the navigation. If you notice right now, it's currently set up for file name. Now, this is the internal navigation, the internal table of contents. If you didn't set up a style for your table of contents previously, what will happen is that the internal table of contents will be built using the file names of each of your documents. So in our case, it would be cover, TOC, chapter 01, chapter 02. Well, that's not exactly helpful for the user. So we're going to choose a multi-level table of contents style, and from the drop-down box, we want to choose the Grimm table of contents. Now remember, unless you have selected your table of contents document as your style source, you're not going to be able to actually see the style you created. We're going to leave the content order based on the page layout. And if you didn't split the documents, if you didn't split the document up using your export tags, you have the ability to do so here. So we can actually choose a specific paragraph style to split our document, but we've already done that, so we'll tell InDesign to go ahead and pay attention to our export tags. Next, in the left column, let's take a look at some of the other options. Go ahead and click on the metadata. Now, it's very important whenever you export to ePub, you leave the unique identifier and ID alone. Unless your publisher is telling you to use something different, leave this alone. This is automatically generated and every ePub needs to have one. Next, you need to make sure you put a proper title. If you don't, the ePub will use the title from your book file. In our case, it's Grimm. So we want Grimm's Fairy Tales. Go ahead and add information for the creator. If you want to choose a date, that's fine, and a description. I admit it's not a great description, but it'll work. You can also include publisher and rights, whether it's in public domain or copyrighted. And it's very important that you at least set the title in this option. Next, we'll choose Viewing Apps. Now, my system has an iBooks app already set up. Now, this is an ePub Reader app. This will allow me, after I export it, it'll open up my iBooks and immediately show me my ePub. If you don't want that, you can just uncheck it now. With that done, let's go ahead and generate our ePub. There's the cover, and here's our first page. Notice the layout and the format is exactly what we want. Our table of contents is next, and these are now clickable links. If we click on one, it should take us directly to the chapter. Up here is the internal table of contents. And of course, I can navigate using my arrow keys. And that's it. The ePub is now created. Now, one other thing I do want to point out, and it happens to be with this table of contents. Now, this is actually the table of contents that we created inside of our book file. This is not the internal table of contents. That's denoted by this button up here. Notice it is using our text and our entries. That's fine. But if you look at the formatting over here, you'll notice the page numbers do not match up with the internal table of contents. Hans and Luck actually begins on page 13 in my ePub reader. In the actual table of contents that I included in the book, it still says it actually began 7. Why? Because if we come back over here, the table of contents for the printed book is 7. So what's happening is that the ePub reader is literally, or InDesign is converting the table of contents to HTML for me, and it is keeping these particular pages the same as they were in the printed version. Because the book is in HTML, the text flow a little bit differently. Furthermore, these numbers will mean nothing if the user decides they want to increase or decrease the size of the font. That may actually increase or decrease the number of pages. The internal table of contents, though, will get the page number right. So here's a tip. One of the things that you can do before you export out to ePub, because you have to create a table of contents style, is create one table of contents styles for your printed book and one table of contents styles just for your ePub. And the ePub table of contents can omit the page numbers. Well, that's it.